So respected teachers, Professor Koipalli, Tikka, Raghavan, and other distinguished professors and teachers and scholars, researchers and students of the university. It is a great honor to come here again and talk about some of the South Indian indigenous legacies, especially in the context of alarming cultural and cultural nationalist formations in the country. So we know that these are hard times and darker times for us, where human beings are lynched in the streets, and some of those people are saving the animals and considering the animal as sacred and the human as something wretched or demonic. This is the sad, dangerous situation that we are in. And how come that people are subscribing to this demonizing, otherizing, hegemonic discourse? It's a question that was posed by Antonio Gramsci almost 100 years ago in the context of Italy. How could the people vote for the so-called fascists? How could the people subscribe to this kind of an elitist and exclusivist, hierarchical kind of agenda and cultural nationalist project? Because they are ignored. Because as Gramsci said, subaltern cannot enter into history, and the subaltern voice is ignored everywhere. It is sidelined, it is pushed to the periphery, and that is why they are not given adequate space and voice and representation. That's why the hegemonic elitist forces are able to manipulate their mandate. That has happened in our country also. We never listen to the voices of Gramsci. We never listen to the voices that warned us against this kind of a majoritarian pro-fascist mobilization that began some 20, 30 years back, especially after the Babri Masjid and the Mandirization discourse, the Mandal, Mandir and Masjid debate. Historians and other scholars, they were trying to warn us, but we never adequately paid attention to those warnings. Gramsci's voice again is very much illuminating. Because the people are not given voice and recognition, they are not sufficiently represented, they are unheard. That is why they become complicit in the kind of consensual regime that appears from top. It is also because we forget the lessons of history. It's also because we are unaware of the real legacies of the people in our own land. And that is the significance of South India. Even in the recent concluded election, we know that it is in Tamil Nadu and Kerala that the majoritarian forces, the Hindu Nationalist Party, is lacking. But this is not a space of relief. This is not a space to relax. We have other elections coming. The Panchayat elections and the Legislative Assembly elections are coming. So politics is very important. While discussing literature and aesthetics, you cannot differentiate aesthetics and politics. They are inseparable, almost inseparable. So when we discuss aesthetics, we are also talking about politics, and there is as Terry Eagleton and others have, better than me, there is an ideology of the aesthetic. The aesthetic is constituted by socio-political and historical processes and contexts and the real material forces in society. So the ideology of the aesthetic, that is what I am stressing on in this short lecture on the Tamil aesthetics, the South Indian aesthetics, South India as a cultural geography, South India as a historical terrain that resisted this project of elitism for so long. For almost 1,000 years, it resisted this hegemonic project of the Varna and caste. The Varnashrama Dharma project, which is enshrined in the Vedas, in the Rig Veda in particular. In the first Veda, you have the Purusha Sukta. And in the Purusha Sukta, you have this fourfold classification of the society, which is a hierarchical system. It is not just a neutral classification, but it is an extremely patriarchal and casted hierarchical view of culture, view of society, view of polity. It divided everything, divide and rule. That was the imperial policy of internal imperialism, which is called internal imperialism by people like Swami John Dharmatirtha. He has written and published that book, The Menace, the history and the menace of Hindu imperialism, Hindu colonialism, in both English and Malayalam. He published it from Lahore, from Pakistan in 1942. He was a disciple of Narayana Guru, who proclaimed in 1914 that Narayana Guru, his guru, he proclaimed that we do not need this Ram Raj, but people are killed for learning the art of letters. But Shambhuga is killed, where Bali is sniped from behind and murdered, cold-blooded, where Sita is denied justice. We don't need that. We don't need that Ram Raj. And he admitted that the Western intervention, Western metaphysics and philosophy in particular, the Enlightenment tradition of Europe and modernity at large, that is our master. The Western, British modernity, English language, he never knew English language. He never got an opportunity even to study English, but he sent all the disciples to learn English, and he accepted the modernity and the benefits and liberation potentials of modernity. That is why in 1914 he said we must pray for the victory of the British in the First World War, because they are our masters. They have given us the right to education and sagehood. If it was in the time of Rama, I would have met with the fate of Shambhuga, he said. Shambhuga was killed for being a Shudra, because the Purusha Sukta and the Manusmriti and the Gita, all these texts of Brahmanical Hinduism, it actually prohibits the education of the Shudra, women of all Varna, and Chandala in there is not to say about the Chandala. Even the human status of the Chandala is in question in the Chaturvarnya project, because only the four Varnas are full-fledged human beings. Within the four Varnas of Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra, Shudras are called subservient people. It is created from the word Shudra. Shudra is created. You know what the dictionaries talk about the Shudra. But they are denied education, human rights, full-fledged human rights, and only it is the privilege of the Trivarnikas, of the top twice born, as Gopal Guru would say. The top twice born, TTB, they are the privileged so-called caste Hindus. So the Shudra and women were denied this. And this project of social hierarchy and classification, this became the manifesto and the constitution, the building structure of India from the Vedic ages onwards. From BC 1500 onwards, this was the so-called constitution, the governing principle of the so-called Bharatvarsh. And it is Ambedkar who actually rewrote this edicts of the Manu, the laws of Manu. George Bahler has translated. Plenty of people, when Donijar has done that. new translation. Plenty of translations are available today where you can read about the prohibition of letters, and you know the punishment given in Manusmriti. If the Shudra listens to the Veda or the art of letters, alphabets, boiling lead must be poured into his ears. That is the punishment. If he utters it, his tongue must be plucked out. And if he teaches it to the other Shudra or Chandala kids or women in particular, his body must be cut off, chopped off into two parts. This is the punishment. And that is why in early 20th century, when Vallathol Narayana Menon, when he translated that Veda, he was the first to study the Rig Veda, and he translated it into Malayalam in verse. And when he lost his hearing, he became deaf, and then the Brahmanical people said, because he touched the Veda, which is Abhaurishaya, which is divine, God-given, and divine, and no Shudra can touch it. So this is the condition. This was here in Kerala also. That is why in 1914, Narayana Guru proclaimed that it is the British who gave me sannyasam, because if the Hindus ruled by the Smritis, he said. If it was in the time of Rama, I would have met with the fate of Shambhuga. Shambhuga was beheaded by the king himself, king and the killer. The killer becomes the king and the god, unfortunately in the Indian context. And we never notice this violence, this bloody violence of genocidal kind of violence and repressions in the Vedic and the so-called Puranic kind of textuality, the imperial textuality of internal imperialism in India. The Smriti Shruti Puranas, that is the imperial textuality of India. This system, this Chaturvarnya system. And fortunately, South India was resisting. That is our topic. That is why I couldn't elaborate about all this Varnashrama Dharma project. But South India, for almost 1,000 years, for almost a millennia, it resisted that discourse. The Muvendas, the South Indian kings, the South Indian rulers, the chieftains of South Indian three kingdoms like the Pandyas or the Cheras and the Cholas in particular, they resisted it for so long. It became the rule in the Vedic age itself in North India, northwestern India, and in the Gangetic place it became the rule by by the 4th century AD, or in the beginning of the Common Era. It became the way of life in the Gangetic plains. But below the India, south of India, it was resisted in the Chola country, in the Pandya country, and in the Chera country, which is Keralam, or the Chera land is called Keralam, by the three chieftains of South India. And South India is having a different history, altogether having a different cultural history and geography than the North Indian regions of Manusmriti and Chaturvarnya. South India has produced its own epic, and it is having an ancient language of Tamil, which is the first recognized classical language in India. Tamil was accepted soon after the constitution. In the 1960s Tamil was accepted as the ancient language, which may be compared to the Chinese or the Sumerian or the Egyptian kind of languages and civilizations. And Tamil is having a continuous literary history of at least 2,500 years. That is the significance of Tamil as a classical language, as a true ancient language with continuity, which belongs to in linguistics terms, it belongs to the Dravidian group of languages. And this Dravidian cultural geography was resisting the Indo-Aryan or the Indo-European, if you talk in terms of linguistic families and all. So the Vedic metaphysics, the Vedic obscurantism of Chaturvarnya was resisted for so long because it was having a different genealogy and cultural legacy. And that legacy is the legacy of Shamanism, you could say. Not Brahmanism. It was shaped by, South India was shaped in early Common Era, at least from BC 3rd century or BC 4th or 5th century, at least from the time of the Buddha, that is the 6th century BC, 600 years before Christ. So at least from the time of Buddha, South India was keenly influenced by something called the Shamanic traditions of India, not by the Brahmanical tradition. This is the epistemological and cultural conflict in Indian history and society. Brahmanical versus Shramana culture. You have Kancha Elaya and Gopal Guru and Gailomet elaborating about it. You may be researching on those things. I am not entering into the details. So the Shamanic culture means the culture of the people. Shramana means those who work hard. Shrama, those who indulge in shrama or hard labor or work, whether it is physical labor or intellectual labor. So the laboring class, the working class, you can say in Marxist terms, it may be equated. It is nowhere near, but it may be equated with the working class in India. So the Shamanic tradition of Buddhism and Jainism, that has influenced and shaped the South Indian cultures, not the Vedic culture as such, because Vedic learning and knowledge was denied to the people. In the Purusha Sukta and in the Manusmriti and in all those sacred texts, the Smriti, Shruti, Puranas, they prohibit the learning of letters and knowledge, especially Vedic knowledge, by the Shudra, women of all Varna and the outcasts in general. Those who are outside this Chaturvarnya fold, they are called the outcasts or the untouchables or the Avarna. They are called the Varna Bhakyas or outside the Jati Varna system. They are the Avarnas without any Varna. They were basically these Sramanas. Because of Hindu hegemony by the Middle Ages, they became subservients of, or the, what you call the slaves of, the broken slaves, according to Ambedkar. Who were the untouchables? Who were the Shudras and how they became so? How they became the fourth Varna in the Varnashrama Dharma? Who were the untouchables? How they became so? These are the essential questions in Indian cultural history. These were articulated by Baba Saheb himself in the 1940s, in early 20th century, before his conversion to Buddhism. So anyway, my point is that unlike North India, where you have this Hindu Brahmanical system from the Vedic ages onwards, in South India, you have a different picture. South India was shaped by the Shramanic traditions, multiple traditions, not just by a single tradition, multiple traditions. From BC 3rd century onwards, the first missionary religion, Buddhism, reached in the form of the missionaries of Ashoka. Ashoka sent his own daughter Sanghamitra and his brother Mahinda to various parts of the world. So many missionaries were sent to various parts of the world. So Buddhism, Jain monks reached Shravanbelgola, South Canara. You have those places even in Wayanad and here in Bangara Manjeshwar, you have the Jain settlements. In Wayanad also you have Jain settlements today. But Jainism has compromised a lot in order to save their own life and property. Jainism imbibed many casteist values, hierarchical values of Hinduism. They compromised, some of them, and they survived. Those who resisted, they were wiped out. That is what happened to Buddhism in South India. Because the Buddhists never submitted to the caste system. Because as Ambedkar says in Who Are the Untouchables, they never submitted to Brahmanic priestocracy and the priestly patriarchy of Brahmanism. They were completely erased from this land. They were pushed to the margins of the Indian subcontinent, to Sri Lanka, to Myanmar, to Thailand and various other parts of South Asia. Now Buddhism is there in various other locations within South Asia, but not in India. In India, you have only the Ambedkarite Buddhists, the neo-Buddhists after Ambedkar. This famous conversion at Nagpur and all in 1950s, you know. So, South India was shaped largely by the missionaries of Ashoka and especially the nuns and monks sent by Ashoka. The nuns who taught the people. The Dhamma-lipi, the writing system, which is the Dhamma-lipi, or it is later called Brahmi by the Indologists and British researchers, that was introduced in South India by the Buddhist nuns. Songs and all this poetry and all, Theri Gadha, which is in the Tipitaka, the Buddhist canon. Tipitaka means the three baskets of Buddhism. Sutta, Vinaya and Abhidhamma Pitaka. They are called the Tipitaka in Pali, the Pali canon. Pali, which is a Prakrit language. Buddha never used the elitist and scholarly pedantic language of Sanskrit, of the nobility, but he used the language of the common people to spread his word. The gospel was preached in the common people's language, the language used by the so-called working classes, the Shramanas and the women in particular. That is why he switched over to Pali or Artha Magathi. He was mostly preaching in the Magadha region. That is why he adopted the people's language, not the Sanskrit scholarly language. He was equally competent. He was a prince, as you know. Anyway, that gospel reached South India, at least in the time of Ashoka, who created these missions and missionary kind of gatherings and congregations. And his own daughter proselytized many parts of South Asia, including Sri Lanka. Sangamita went from this Magadha region, from Odisha, from Kalinga. She went on a ship to South India and Sri Lanka, and she planted that Bodhi sapling, the bod tree in Anuradhapura, and that is still growing there. You have Dr. Sugadan of Calicut. He's nurturing that tree in Calicut, near that customs road, near the beach. You have a branch of that Bodhi tree from Anuradhapura growing in Calicut now. Two trees were there, but one is lost now. So anyway, Kerala also had its Neo-Buddhism in the 1920s and 30s, led by Mithawadi Krishnan, the editor of Mithawadi, the journal, and Sahodaran Ayyappan, the editor of the Sahodaran journal, and C.V. Kunjiraman. They were the lead disciples of Narayana Guru, and they initiated a Neo-Buddhist discourse in early 20th century Kerala as part of the Renaissance self-fashionings or reformative activities. And it is Pandit Ayodhi Tasar in Tamil Nadu who pioneered this Neo-Buddhist discourse, as pointed out by G. Aloysius, V. Gita and S.V. Rajadure and others. It is Ayodhi Tasa Pandidar who pioneered this Neo-Buddhist discourse and the discourse of conversion in South India, especially in the Tamil context in late 19th century. And this was possible after the discovery or rediscovery of the Chankam legacy. Chankam legacy in Tamil, it means that it is from the Sangam of the Buddha. These are part of the triple gems, the three Sharanas and the three Ratnas of Buddhism, the triple gems, the three asylums, the foundational teachings of the Buddha. That is Buddham, that is enlightenment. Anybody can become a Buddha. Anybody can be enlightened if you have the awareness of the world and if you get an ethical understanding of the world, the essence of the world, then you become enlightened. You are free. You are into a state of nibbana or liberation. There is no concept of personal moksha in Buddhism, but only critical deliverance from all the desires and the bondages of life. That state, Buddhahood, we can achieve, anybody. Even untouchable women were able to do that. That is why you have Manimeghala, a non-Brahman woman from South India, from near Kanchi. She went to Vanchi. She had her education in Kerala, in Cheraland, in Vanchi, in Kodungalur. Vanchi or Tiruvanchi was a great Buddhist center of learning initiated by the Ashokan missionaries, started by the Ashokan missionaries, but later, as in the case of Takshashila, the ancient university, running from Buddha's own times, which was developed into a Vishwavidyalaya or university during the reign of Ashoka in BC 3rd century, 200 years after the Buddha. And in the case of Nalanda, which came to prominence, and later it got into the liberal stream of Mahayana by the Gupta period. Guptas were the first, the Brahmanical dynasty and rulers of North India, having a greater empire. So during the Gupta period, it got into the slightly Brahmanical mode of Mahayana. The original school is Theravada. Theravada means the teaching of the elders. Elders, Theras and Theris, that is why you have the Theri Gadha, the songs of the elder nuns, which provided the model for Avayar and other women poets of South India in Chankam literature. So the original teaching was called something called Theravada, the pioneering leading school. And later it got liberalized. Gradually it got assimilated into power circles, and even the Brahmanical forces crept into it. We couldn't check the growth of all these things even through violence. So they got in and they made the liberalization and digressed it or split it from within. So that is called the Mahayana. So Nalanda was a great Mahayana kind of institution, which was offering various languages and various disciplines to students from all walks of life, even people from South Asia or the Gandhara regions, even people coming from Mongolia and China. They were, about Fahian and Huansang and Itzing and so many other people from China and Mongolia coming to India in search of the Buddhist wisdom and the texts, the Tipitaka from here. So Nalanda was attracting all those things, but what happened to Nalanda. Mahayana is a kind of Brahmanical aberration, and it diluted the core teaching. Nagarjuna, who is celebrated as the second Buddha, he transgressed from the real rational philosophy, the cause-effect theory of Buddha, because Buddha believed in Anityavada. Buddha's theory is called Anityavada, the theory of impermanence. Anityavada, there is nothing that is Nitya. Everything is in change, everything is in flux, nothing is unchangeable as change. You have the echo in Marx and all. Change is the only reality. That is the theory of the Buddha. Everything is dependent on each other. Praditya samutpada, cause-effect relationship. There is no cause without a reason, the cause-effect rationality. So the first philosopher to talk about rationality is not the Greco-Roman school, but it is the Buddha. It is there. Simultaneously it is there, developing in Greece also, in the great masters like Socrates, Aristotle, Plato and others. You have it, definitely. But the more convincing, more rooted kind of logical reasoning you will find in the Buddha, that is called the Anityavada, or in Pali it is called Anicca. Nothing is permanent. Impermanence, theory of impermanence, theory of causation, theory of cause and effect. And there is no soul then. Everything is perishable. Nothing is permanent. There is no transmigration of the soul and all those things. These are all things brought in by Mahayana later. That is why Ambedkar, when he wrote his own People's Bible of Buddhism, the Buddha and his Dharma, the unfinished work, his magnum opus, when he was studying other sources from the Pali canon and the Chinese, he even went to the Chinese sources, because the Sanskritic sources and the sutras here were doctored or manipulated in the Middle Ages towards the Brahmanical kind of transgressions. That is why. So anyway, my point is that if I elaborate all these things, the word Sangam is, or Chankam in Tamil, Chankam is from Chankam in poetry or Chankam literature, Chankam culture. All these are from the Sangha of the Buddha, the concept of Buddha, which is the society, or the organization, the organizational setup, the democratic setup of the organization, that is called the Sangha, and which is based on his Vinaya kind of rules. Vinaya Pitaka talks about the Vinaya rules on which Ambedkar himself pays homage to that in his last BBC speech. He says that I am taking these values of modernity, the democratic values of modernity like liberty, equality and fraternity, not exactly directly from the French Revolution or the Magna Carta or the European model straight away, but he was educated in the Western metaphysics and philosophy and everything, but also from my master, the Buddha, from whose Sanghas I am taking the democratic principles. So, Sangha is a direct kind of legacy of Buddhism that you will find, and Chankam literature, the period is roughly between BC 5th century and AD 5th century. It's a kind of tentative kind of periodization. It may vary, it is challenged. Some scholars take only from 3rd century BC onwards, the moment of Ashokan missionaries to 3rd century AD or CE. So, roughly, broadly, it may be a 1000 years from BCE 500 to CE 500. And during this era, South India was keenly influenced by the teachings of the Buddha, his theory of impermanence, and also by the teachings of the Tirthankaras, the Jain philosophers and the Jain sages. 24 Tirthankaras. Mahavira, a contemporary of the Buddha, is supposed to be the last Tirthankara. So they were also talking about the same thing, about non-violence, about peace, about tranquility, about getting rid of social hierarchies, all these things. So it created a culture of tolerance, a culture of polyphony, a democratic culture which surpassed the social cleavages and the social stratifications and caste gender divisions. Caste was unknown to South India till the early common era, till the 5th or 4th century AD or CE. Caste is not, jati is not a word in Tamil. Jati is a Sanskrit word. In Pali and Prakrit languages, the word is there, but it is used in a different sense. Jati denotes the human birth, the process of organic human birth from the womb and genitalia of the mother. That is called jati. Jayate, that process. But in Sanskrit, it consolidated into a social hierarchy, the caste system, jati vyavastha, the varnashrama system, varna system, which is a social stratification, which is exclusive and elitist, and it otherizes women of all varnas. They are not given human status because the Purusha Sukta never mentions the birth of women, and it is from the Purusha that these Trivarnikas and Shudras are born, from the various body organs. That is why when Phule was asked, he said, then Virat Purusha or the Brahma Purusha may be having a genital organ in the mouth. That is what Mahatma Phule, the so-called pioneer of Indian social reform and renaissance in Western India, who paved the foundation for Ambedkarite revolution and the democratic constitution and all in 19th century. He said, his own wife Savitribai Phule, being the first educated Indian teacher, lady teacher also. He was educated in the missionary school. He was denied education in the Gurukula by saying that he is a so-called Shudra. Chattambi Swamigal was denied that Gurukula access by saying that his mother is a Shudra, though his father was a Brahman. By saying that his mother belonged to the so-called Shudra Varna. What happened to Vallatol Narayana Menon, I said. When he translated the Rig Veda, people said, that is why when the Shudra touched the Veda, he lost the thing. Because the punishment in Manusmriti is pouring the boiling metal, boiling lead must be poured into the ears if a Shudra listens, secretly listens to the art of letters and chanting of the Veda in particular. So, this when Narayana Guru was asked, he said, is it like a tree sprouting? എന്താണ് മരം പൊട്ടി മുളയ്ക്കുന്നത് പോലെയാണോ ഈ വിരാട് പുരുഷൻ്റെ ശരീരഭാഗങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നിങ്ങനെ ത്രൈവർണികർ ബ്രാഹ്മണ ക്ഷത്രിയ വൈശ്യ ശൂദ്ര ഈ പുരുഷൻ്റെ ശരീരഭാഗങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നുണ്ടാകുന്നത് മരം പൊട്ടി മുളയ്ക്കുന്നത് പോലെയാണോ? He was ridiculing this particular Vedic theory of origin. So this is such an absurd kind of obscurantism, which is propagated as apaurushaya and divine and God-given and religion and all those things. That is why people never questioned it, or they were not unable to question it. Whatever resistance came, it was assimilated again. That happened to Bhakti also. After the Middle Ages, from the 8th century onwards, there were Bhakti schools, plenty of Bhakti schools. The caste question, gender question was articulated, but somehow Brahmanism reappropriated it through dominant forms of, again, through Vaishnavism and Shaivism, the Bahujan revolt, the women's spirit of fighting, Akka Mahadevi or plenty of other women poets were there, but eventually they were absorbed in the Shaivite kind of worship or the Vaishnavite stream. This happened. So anyway, till the 8th century, this was not the picture. Till the 8th century, Jati was unknown here, Varna was unknown here, and they produced glorious forms of literature. That is what you call the Ayim Tinai after Buddha's own Panchaseela. All these numerical things are devised after the Buddha's kind of concepts. You have the Ayim Tinai, means the fivefold great epics in Tamil. Chilappatikaram, Manimekhalai, Kundalakesi, Valayapatti, Jivaka Chintamani. These are the 5 great epics of Tamil language. Epics were written in the ancient classical language of Tamil. You have A.K. Ramanujan himself translating certain extracts from these great Lakshmi Holmstrom. She has done a kind of re-narration or retelling of the Chilappatikaram and Manimekhalai legacy. Manimekhalai I mentioned, like Chandala Bhikshuki. She was a kind of non-Brahman woman, but she and her mother, the what you call the middle-aged woman, she was also accepted to the Vanchi University. Aravana Adigal, the Buddhist teacher, sage, he taught them, and they were having frequent journeys across South India from Kanjipuram, the Pallava capital, to Pumbuhar, another port town, to Kodungalur or Muziris or Marijapuram or Vanji. It was then known as Vanji. So from between Kanchi and Vanji, along the trade routes, along the Periyar, the greatest river in South India, they were having many crossovers and crisscrossing, transgressing kind of journeys across gender and caste and all those social cleavages of Brahmanism in early centuries of the Common Era. So Manimekhala is an example. She became a world teacher and a globetrotter. She has even gone to Indonesia and far South Asia to teach or to spread the word of gospel. The word of Buddha was preached by her in various parts of South Asia. Manimekhalai Viharam was there, now it is Kamachi Amman Kovil. So this happened to all the Buddhist shrines and the sacred pallis. These were all pallis, from Tiruchirappalli to all those pallis were there. That is why in South India, south of Kalinga, you have plenty of pallis. Nampalli is in Hyderabad. Nayappalli is at the heart of Odisha, near the Kalinga war site and all. Tamil Nadu, you have plenty of pallis. Kerala, it is abounding with all these place names. Palli and Cheri and Kavu, these all the worshipping places were Kavus. They were transformed into Brahmanical places in the Middle Ages, and then they became Kshetra or the temple. These were the pallis. The toponymy explains the genealogy of Buddhism and Jainism in testify the concrete evidences of the presence of the non-Brahman kind of cultures in Kerala and in the whole of South India. So the Panchamahakavya is the greatest example, and unfortunately most of them are lost. Only 2 are available now. Only the Chilappatikaram, which was written by a Keralite, which was written by a Chera prince, a younger prince in the Chera dynasty called Ilango. Ilango wrote that. Ilango himself means the younger king. Kon means king. Ilango means the younger king. He was the younger brother of Cheran Chengutuvan, who was ruling from this Musiras or the Mahodayapuram in early Common Era. So he wrote that in Trikana Madilagam is the place. Madilagam, now it is known as Madilagam, north of Musiris. And Manimekhalai, which is a Buddhist epic in which the journeys of these women, Madhavi and Manimekhalai, that is narrated. It is written by a commoner, a merchant of grains, Chatanar, Chitalai Chatanar. He wrote that. He was a contemporary of Ilango also. And he wrote that. It is in a sense, it is a sequel to Ilango. Ilango's Chilapadigaram, in which you have the triangular love story. Chilapadigaram means the story of the Chilambu or the anklet. It is the tale of the anklet. And that triangular love story and the later conversion of these women into Buddhism and their Buddhist journeys and education, and that philosophy is being elaborated in the long epic created by Chatana. So only these two are now available. These were rediscovered only in the 19th century, only after 1850s, when the missionary activity, when the European intervention was here, when the Christian missionaries in particular, they worked in South India. Some of them promoted this kind of alternative legacies because they were also fighting Brahmanism and caste in a particular way. So that is why they found these resources, the Dravidian so-called, these are of course contentious or challengeable kind of divisions, linguistic divisions. So they found an ally in the Dravidian kind of movement, which was initiated by Pandita Ayodhidasar. And Pandita Ayodhidasar himself was promoted and given encouragement by the missionaries. Reverend John Ratnam, for example, or Colonel Olcott, the Theosophical Society. These were all establishments under, that happened under colonial modernity in South India, under the British in particular. Narayana Guru saying the British are his gurus. Ambedkar saying Phule, Kabir and the Buddha are my masters. So that kind of an alternative legacy was able to come up again in the context of the missionary, the Christian missionary intervention in particular in South India. That is why you have John Ratnam developing a kind of camaraderie with other Buddhist monks from Ceylon, in particular that Anagariga Dhammapala, for example. Anagariga Dhammapala, he came here and he worked with the missionaries here, and he is actually instrumental in founding the Mahabodhi Society of India and also delivering part of Bodh Gaya from the clutches of the Hindutva forces then. It was almost made into a Shaivite temple, Bodh Gaya, the place where Buddha got enlightenment, where the original Bodhi tree, which was completely destroyed many times by Shashanka and Pushyamitra Sunga and plenty of others. Even Ashoka's wife was jealous about the Bodhi tree and she ordered to cut it down or burn it down, because Ashoka was that much devoted to that tree, Bodhi tree, rather than this woman. So that is why she was jealous about that Bodhi tree. So anyway, it is a Britisher, like a Christian Britisher like this Alexander Cunningham, the founding father of the Archaeological Survey of India. He actually nourished that tree. Like Ashoka, he was also a devotee of that tree. He was giving milk and honey to that tree. That is how it was brought back. So Anagariga Dhammapala and Alexander Cunningham, they were all able to understand and realize this greater global legacy of international, transnational. It is not a narrow parochial nationalism. I am not talking about any glorious past or narrow parochial kind of nationalism or the Indian legacy of Buddhism and all. But this was a transnational, transoceanic. It developed through the trade routes, through the ancient land routes and the sea routes, the Indian Ocean trade routes and the even transatlantic or trans-Pacific kind of voyages were there, as I told you. Manimekhala was crossing the oceans. Manimekhala went up to this Java or Sumatra or Indonesian regions. And people, Dhammagirti, Dignaga, all these people, all the great philosophers of Buddhism and these Nyaya and Sangha people, they were traveling south to Colombo and Anuradhapura and Sri Lanka through oceanic journeys. But when Brahmanism captured India by the Middle Ages, by the 8th or 10th century, it broke all these trade routes and it again, it actually stagnated. the growth. Only through trade routes you can have cultural exchanges, the exchange of technology. That is why the Asian African knowledge reached through the Arabs to Europe, then Byzantium and the other Greco-Roman knowledge, and the Renaissance in Europe was possible because of the trade connections, because of transatlantic and transoceanic voyages. So when Brahmanism captured India, it prohibited the learning of letters by the majority of people, women and Shudra and Chandala, and also the outcast, the other religions, it is called as Mlecha. That is a term originally used to for the genocidal extermination, annihilation of the Buddhists, Mlecha. Now it is used against in the Vanga Renaissance, in the Bengal Renaissance in the 19th century. You have in the Vande Mataram legacy, Vande Mataram nationalism, you have that is used against the Muslim in particular. That is the ultimate other after the Middle Ages. By the Middle Ages, by the 15th, 16th century, they got rid of all the Buddhists here. And most of the Jains, they became subservient like our minister Amit Shah. And then that word is now being, after the Middle Ages, post-Middle Ages, it is now being targeted to stereotype and mark and annihilate or otherize. In particular, otherization, demonization happens first. Buffalo demon, that is the thing. Mahishasura, Mardini, Mlechan, Murchayade, all these terms you have in the Bengal Renaissance, in Bangim Chandra, Aurobindo, Vivekananda and others. And they have become the spring sources of the new educational policy today. It may be declared in a day or two. This is the sad condition because we forget history, because we forget our own social, cultural formations, our cultural history in particular. That is why we don't know about our own legacies. We praise this Brahmanical Sanskritic epics in which the demonization is the main agenda. If you look at Ramayana, for example, who are these monkeys and apes and bears and birds and reptiles in the Sanskritic epics? And who are the leaders or the protagonists? The killer becomes the king and the god and the hero, epic hero. The killer, always with the weapons of mass destruction, weapons of arms in hands. So the killer, only in India I think, the killer becomes the king and the god. That is why we are having Godse as an idol worshipped in some temples in North India. And the portrait of Savarkar now adorns the gallery of the parliament, Indian parliament. Capture the temple of democracy, said Baba Sahib. Now, what is the capture? You see, for that man who wrote multiple apologies to the British from the cellular jail, he is adorning the parliament and the portrait gallery. So this is the sad plight that we are in because we are unaware. We don't talk about, we don't resist, we don't dissent. That is why. That is why fascism has come to power, making a mockery of the constitution and the democratic setup itself in India. We are not indulging in discourses and debates and contestations and challenges. Our critical consciousness is gone. And we are now being trained into a kind of parochial. Tagore was praying about into that heaven of freedom. Father, let my country awake, where the world is not classified into these narrow parochial walls of nationalism. He was an internationalist. Even Tagore, in early 20th century, he said nationalism is a disease. He wrote and published it. We can. Baba Sahib said it is a double-edged sword. It is disastrous. It may be used for getting your liberation from the imperial forces. That is true. But once you get liberation, that must subside and a universality must prevail. Nationalism must wither away, like the Marxist concept of the state. Even the state authoritarian formations like the state must wither away. Nationalism must wither away after you get that, what you call the liberation from the yoke of colonialism. Anyway, you have these great anthologies also in Sangam literature. You have the 8 great anthologies. 18 altogether, 8 of them are great anthologies, Kalittogai, Kurundogai, Paditruppathu, Agananur, Purananur, so many anthologies, 8 in particular, and then you have shorter versions or idylls or nature depicting landscape-based poems. That is what is the aesthetics of Sangam literature was landscape-based, nature-based, nature-oriented, or merged with the whole world and nature in particular. That is the speciality. That is the most striking uniqueness of Sangam literature, is its unique aesthetics that is wedded to the worldliness. Edward Said, for example, he talked about the worldliness of the text. Here in worldliness, compassion and Maitri, all these are basically terms from Buddha and Ambedkar later. Maitri, the expression, Tinai aesthetics is nothing but an artistic expression or a poetic, metaphorical rendering of Maitri itself. Maitri is nothing but unconditional compassion and love for the whole cosmos, not just for your family and your children or your parents or your beloved, but for others and even for non-living beings, for all living beings and non-living beings, and for the whole cosmos you are wedded to, because that is the theory of Buddha. Everything is interdependent. Nothing is independent. Everything is related to each other. What happens to the Western Ghats today, it will affect you tomorrow. You will die in drought and without water. If you cut that thing, if you remove the sacred groove, Kavud Indial, Kulam Vattum, Kudivallam Vattum. That is true. There is a cause-effect relationship. If you destroy the grassland sholas of Western Ghats, your rivers will dry up. There won't be anything. If you spray endosulfan for this 25 years, then your whole soil and water will be polluted and your children will suffer. Posterity will suffer. Posterity is also part of you, not just your children. They will also have children. So think about your grandchildren and their children and humanity at large and the whole planet and the whole cosmos. We are not independent. We are existing simultaneously in relation with each other. What happens to a link in the food chain? It will affect. The tiger will perish if the worm is touched. They are part of the food chain. Those who study biology and the life sciences, they may know. So anyway, that is the idea, and that is why it is nature-oriented kind of aesthetics, in which poetry in general was classified as Akam and Puram. You can read our great Ayyappa Panikar, who has elaborated on this in Kerala. My own teacher, D. Vinayachandran, was a great fan and a practitioner of this kind of poetry. Tinai aesthetics he tried to practice somehow, but he was not that much successful. So I heard this from my teacher D. Vinayachandran and also from Ayyappa Panikar, who was my teacher's teacher, because Harris was a student of Panikar. So through Harris and Panikar also I know about this, and it is A.K. Ramanujan who has written the most brilliant illustrations of this particular Tinai aesthetics in his poems of love and war. That is the greatest example, and practice also, poetic practice, translation as a transcreation, and what you call trans poetry you have in A.K. Ramanujan's poems of love and war, published by OUP. You have that big book. In 85 he published it. Poems of love and war. Translations from classical Tamil Chankam poetry, you have it. And interior landscape and his Vajana and all those things that you may be aware of, Basavanna, Alama Prabhu, Akkamahadevi and all. He has also translated the Kannada Vajanas, but that is Middle Ages, that is medieval, that is Bhakti and Shaivite. But this is Dravidian and almost secular, you can say, polyphonic, not just secular in the limited sense, in the modern sense, but polyphonic, because you have the influence of Buddhism is there, you have the keen influence of Jainism is there, you even have Christian influence in Chankam period. Apostles, we believe they have reached South India, and especially there are books about the Christian influence in Tirukkural, which is proclaimed as the Bible of the Tamil people. in which the ethics, more correctly, it is not exactly a religious text. If you say Bible, you will have that connotation. It's a religious thing, but it is not exactly religious. It is largely secular, and it talks about ethics, how to live an ethical life, and it is fashioned exactly after the Tipitaka. You have this Aram Purul and those one more kind of division, like the Tipitaka, the Sutta, Abhidharma and Vinaya. You have Aram, Purul and Mudal, I think. So that kind of a division. There is no mention of the Brahmanical moksha in the Tirukkural by Thiruvalluvar. And remember, he is a Valluvar. Thiruvalluvar is a Valluvar. Valluvar is the title of the Pulaya people in South India. So all the literature, mostly 90% of the Chankam literature was created by the so-called Dalits of today. After the Middle Ages, they were made into Dalits in South India. Before that, they were not Dalits. I told you, Jati is a Sanskrit word that reached South India after the Middle Ages. So before the Middle Ages, before the 8th century, it was written mostly by the wandering mendicants and the minstrels in the courts of the Chera and Pandya chiefs, like Nakiran or Nachinar. Nachinar is a great woman author, Nachinar. Avayar, 3 Avayars were there. The earliest Avayar, it is said that she lived in early Common Era. She was influenced by the Therigatha of Buddhism, the songs of the elder nuns. So plenty of people, Kapilar, Paranar, so many, Ilambodiyar, Mudubodiyar, in various anthologies. Togai means anthology, Kalit Togai, Kurum Togai, the condensed anthology is called Kurum Togai, Chariya, haiku-like poetry. And Thiruvalluvar's on Kural is nothing but a very condensed, extremely crystallized, jewel-like, again from the Triratna of the Buddha, crystallized form of poetry. That is what is Kural is all about. Highly, extremely condensed. Kural, Kurugia, like you have the Dohas in Kabir's Doha. Ambedkar viewed Kabir as his guru. So Kabir's Doha, like that you have, that is in the Middle Ages, 15th, 16th century, but in early Common Era, perhaps in the 1st or 2nd century CE, Thiruvalluvar has written it all. And there are arguments, there are books, even in Malayalam you will find that Christian influence was there in the philosophy of love. He talks about that. The philosophy of sacrifice, it is there. So perhaps influenced by the Jewish and the Judeo-Christian traditions are there. So it was a polyphonic, real polyphonic or secular or kind of legacy, having a Dravidian ethnic kind of background, and it was largely shaped by the Buddhist kind of wisdom and the Shramanic, you could say, the Jain and Buddhist traditions and the Ajivaka tradition. Such heretic traditions are together known as Shramanic kind of traditions. The legacy of the laboring people, the working classes in India. So largely as Shramanic and what you call cosmopolitan, transnational influences or global influences are there in Chankam literature, because they were having all these ports. They were having trade routes all along. Pumbuhar, then you have this Kanji, Chennai and all those ports, Muziris and plenty of ports were there. So they were having the global legacies and connections. How long can I go on? Perhaps since it is time, I will conclude basically. And I would urge you to, my humble submission is that you must read the translations of A.K. Ramanujan, especially his poems of love and war and the introduction that he has written, introducing this aesthetics. It's a landscape-based aesthetics. You have 5 kind of Tinais. Tinai means a landscape paradigm, that is called a Tinai. And the whole landscape of South India is broadly classified into 5. Again, the 5 comes from the Panchaseela of the Buddha. And it is the mountain tops, the Western Ghat mountain tops or the grassland sholas where the Kurunyi blooms. That landscape is called Kurunyi. And the foothills and other slopes where you have the pastoral lands, hills and dales and valleys and all. That is where the wild jasmine blooms. That is called the Mullai Tinai. And the arid, parched land, the dry land, where you don't have much vegetation, much greenery, only some trees like the palai trees, they are growing there, and some cacti may be there. So that is called the Palai Nilam and the Palai Tinai. And then you have the wetlands, as in the Kerala, mid and western land is wetland, paddy fields, agriculture and all this. Agricultural lands, wetlands are called the Marudam Tinai, where you have the cultivation done by the Uravas and all those people in Sangam age. And then the extreme coast along the Arabian Sea, and also in the eastern side along the Bay of Bengal, that is called the Neidal. You have that organization in Kanyanad, you have that turtles being conserved, the conservation people are there. That is that Neidal is from the Ayim Tinai Vazhakkam. This is called this aesthetic, landscape based aesthetics of South India of the Sangam period is called the Ayim Tinai Vazhakkam, or the 5 landscape based aesthetics of South India. So it is conservational, it is ethical, it acknowledges the what you call the vitality and importance and the linkages, interlinkages of the whole nature and the whole cosmos. In particular, it is based on the Anityavada and the theory of dependent origination, or the Praditya Samutpada of the Buddha in particular. So I would urge you to, because of lack of time, and also you need to express your own responses and concerns and questions regarding this issue. So with these introductory words, may I conclude here. I thank the organizers, Dr. Raghavan and Dr. Koipalli, and all the respected teachers and researchers and students present here. Thank you very much.